One of the most important parts of wedding videography is your choice of lenses. I generally say people fall into two camps, and that's primes versus zooms. I've personally been shooting weddings for over 10 years now, and I've had plenty of experience using both types of lenses. This video is more aimed at those who are either just starting out or you've maybe done 1 or 2 seasons and you're looking to upgrade what you already have. If you just bought your first professional camera system or you've just upgraded to like a new lens system, you'll probably have bought some kind of camera bundle which includes a kit zoom, which will be a variable aperture, and if you're lucky it might have also included something like a 50mm prime, which was like f1.8. By the way, I'm mostly going to be referring to full frame lenses in this video. I'll try where I can to mention APS-C and Super 35 and Micro Four Thirds lenses, but generally speaking it will mostly be aimed at full frame shooters. When I first started out I was using the Canon 550D. I used that for quite a few years and I mostly used the 18 to 55mm kit lens that came with it. That was f3.5 to 5.6, and part of the reason I mostly just used that, I did have a 50mm, but the problem is that the 50mm wasn't image stabilized, and it was back in the day when we didn't have IBIS built into cameras like we do now. So the 18 to 55 did have built-in image stabilization, so I ended up using that for a lot of what I was shooting. Wasn't the best in low light, but then again the Canon 550D wasn't really all that usable above ISO 400, maybe 640 if you were really pushing it. So for most situations where the lighting was half decent, I found the 18 to 55 to be really solid. Equally, I think about 2017 or 2018 I upgraded to the GH5 and I got the 12 to 60mm kit lens, again f3.5 to 5.6. I think that works out to be something like 24 to 120, so actually a pretty good zoom range. And again, I used that lens for a lot of what I shot. I did end up with some other lenses which I'll talk about later, but I used that kit zoom lens because it was great. It had built-in image stabilization which worked with a GH5 IBIS for like super smooth shots. And for a lot of what I was shooting, that lens was fantastic and it worked really, really well. Very sharp, very reliable, and if I was still using Micro Four Thirds, the 12 to 60 would be a lens I'd still use. When I upgraded to full frame and got the Lumix S5, I got the kit zoom lens, which is this 20 to 60mm 3.5 to 5.6. It's not the most exciting lens, it's not the fastest lens, so again, low light, not going to be amazing, and you're not going to get amazing background separation either. You're not shooting at sort of 2.8 or 1.8, but this lens is really solid. 20mm is actually quite wide, so it's really good for like a safety angle or using on a gimbal, but equally zooming into 60mm you can zoom in pretty well, and then if you want to go into APS-C you can crop in a bit further. Again, okay, 5.6 isn't going to get you that much background separation, but when you're just starting out or you're sort of still building up, then actually these kit lenses these days are pretty solid. They're usually really sharp, really well built, and I would always recommend giving these a solid go because as long as you know the limitations, you can do a lot with them. I do still bring this lens to weddings even today. It mostly stays in the bag, but if I've got a big church wedding, I need an extra like 5th angle, this will probably go on that angle, and again, I can normally bump the ISO on the S5 or the S5 II and trust it. And yeah, all around this 20 to 60 and a lot of the other kit lenses you can get from Sony and Nikon on Canon, a lot of them actually are really well built and certainly not to be sniffed at. Okay, let's talk prime lenses. So the kind of go-to lens for a lot of people is going to be something like this 50mm from Lumix. This is a 1.8 that I bought with my S5, and I actually don't use this as much as I used to, but when I first had the camera, this was basically on my camera a lot of the time, especially when I was filming things like candids and couple shots. F1.8, obviously you get a lot of background separation, and you can just get that kind of wedding look. And if you're going to only buy one prime, then a 50 is a really good balance between being tight enough to sort of isolate subjects, but wide enough to get most of what you need in shot. But there are times when 50mm is just a little too tight and you're gonna need something a little wider. So for those instances, you probably want something like a 35mm or 24mm, or if you need something super wide, then even this 18mm that I'm shooting on at the moment. And speaking of this 18mm lens, this is the Lumix 18mm lens, again, f1.8. They're all around the same size, all have the 67mm filter thread, and the 18mm has largely replaced my 20 to 60mm kit lens, and I basically use this for safety wide angle shots, but it's also really useful for getting really wide grand gimbal shots of venues, indoors and outdoors. You can get a really cool look, and I find 18mm is wide enough that you can really get everything in, but you don't get that fisheye effect. And I think it's a really worthwhile lens to have in your bag. Equally, I did briefly mention, this is the 35mm 1.8, and this is also a really good gimbal lens. Now this is great more if you're going to be tracking subjects or you want something a little tighter. If you're shooting couple stuff on a gimbal, I tend to find this is really good. You can also use the 50 as well, but if I'm on a gimbal, I usually want to go a little wider and get a bit more of the environment in. But equally, if you're on a camera like the S5 II, which does crop in at 4K 50 and 60 to APS-C, this will then give you a 50mm equivalent. So yeah, 35mm, solid lens. So my absolute favorite prime lens that I own is the Sigma 85 f1.4. Now I did actually have the Lumix 1.8 version, but I just didn't quite get on with it. It didn't seem to play ball with my ND filters. However, this one is fantastic. At 1.4, it is super sharp. And obviously that extra little bit of aperture is really good for getting sort of candid shots of guests when they're mingling after the ceremony. But I also use this as a rear ceremony angle looking down the aisle, depending on the size of the venue. And I sometimes use this for speeches if I'm a little further back, and then if I need a little bit of extra reach, I can crop in to APS-C, keep the 4K resolution, and that'll give me around about 127.5mm focal length on this lens. It's really well built. Little heavier than the Lumix ones, but this has been a fantastic purchase and I've been really pleased with it. And I think that focal length, when it comes to primes, is my favorite. I remember when I had the GH5, I actually had the Olympus 45mm 1.8, so that's like a 90mm equivalent. And that's one, if you're still on Micro Four Thirds, I'd recommend getting that kind of focal length. I think for APS-C, you're looking at sort of a 50 or 60mm lens to get that kind of sort of focal length equivalent. Definitely worthwhile having this. The other thing to mention is it's got aperture ring on the outside, but you can also control it with the A function, so you can actually control aperture on the camera. This is the one I'd recommend if you want any other prime aside from a 50. Okay, let's talk zooms. If you've watched any of my wedding behind the scenes videos, you'll know that I mostly prefer to shoot on a 24-70. Specifically, this is the Sigma 24-70 DG-DN Art. It's actually the first gen. I haven't really had any need to upgrade to the second one, but this is an excellent lens. I've had this since I think around about 2022. Yeah, it must have been about 2022 when I got this, and I just knew that I wanted something to upgrade from using my 20-60 lens. I did want something that was a little faster. This is obviously a fairly fast lens at f2.8. I can get the background separation that I want in things like bridal prep, and I even use this a lot for couple shots depending on how much time we have. It's just a really useful lens that I can easily change the focal length. So if I'm in a tight space and let's say I'm at 50mm and I'm like, oh, actually that's just a bit too tight, I can quickly zoom out without having to worry. And equally, it's really useful having this in things like the ceremony, where I'm often stood at the front, and if I was on a prime lens, I wouldn't be able to easily adjust my focal length without changing my lens, and that's why oftentimes you'll get prime users having, you know, cameras in a holster and stuff, whereas with this, I can just have the one lens. Unfortunately, it's not like f1.8, so I can't get that super blurry background, but you don't necessarily want that all the time. I do like to actually see some of what's in the background, and I find 2.8 is plenty, again, for most situations, and equally in low light, f2.8 is plenty for most scenarios. There's usually enough ambient light, and a lot of mirrorless cameras can easily go into high ISOs and stay clean, and I've never found myself in a situation at a wedding where I've actually needed more than f2.8 on the cameras that I currently use. The other thing to mention with shooting everything more at 2.8 is it's a little bit more forgiving. You get that little bit of extra focal plane. Again, you still get good background separation, but if you're shooting on a really shallow f1.8, 1.4, or even 1.2, you have to really trust your autofocus. Whereas this, if the autofocus slightly misses, or if I have to take over manually because it's just gone a bit funny, even on the best autofocus systems, sometimes they let you down. At least with f2.8, you've got a little bit more room, a little bit more forgiveness if it does miss it slightly. The other thing as well is I like to use this for the first dance, and I do enjoy kind of a tasteful crash zoom at times, not all the time because it would get ridiculous, but sometimes for high energy scenes, I do like to be able to sort of do a little crash zoom and just add a little bit of extra dynamic sort of movement and change to the image. This lens has been an absolute workhorse for the last few years, and if it broke, I would just buy another one straight away. Now this next zoom is very similar to the 24-70, but it is significantly smaller. This is the Sigma 28-70 f2.8. Now I may do a review on this one because I've been so impressed by it. It's a lot lighter. I think it's more plastic as opposed to metal, but it's also only a little bit bigger than my 20-60mm and only a little bit heavier. I bought this lens mostly for my second shooters because a lot of my second shooters use my equipment, and previously they were only using my 50mm lens, which is fine for the most part, but sometimes they are in situations where they didn't quite have enough room, and they did have a 35, but again, switching to a different lens, kind of a pain. I've been giving this to my second shooters lately, and they've all been a lot happier to have the flexibility of being able to change their focal length on the fly. Overall, this is just a fantastic lens, and it's a really good backup if for any reason my 24-70 broke. I don't have to buy a new one straight away. This 28-70 should do most of the job that I need. The other thing as well, it's a 67mm thread, which means I haven't had to buy a load of new ND filters or step-up rings. It just works with the ones I have, so that is also great. So a zoom that I don't personally own, but a friend of mine has, is the Lumix 24-105. Now this is an f4 lens, so you're not going to get quite the nice shallow depth of field that you would get from 2.8 or a really fast prime, but it's a really useful, versatile lens. Again, for events, sometimes you just need to get the shot and you need a reliable lens, and you want one with quite a lot of focal length options. So the 24-105 is definitely worth considering. The other one that you might want to consider is 70-200, either an f4 or a 2.8 if you want to shoot your candids. I personally don't really like using the 70-200, especially the Lumix one. It's a fantastic lens, but it's so heavy for being on my feet and being handheld all day. So what about manual lenses and creative and unusual lenses? We've exclusively talked about photography style autofocus lenses that are very safe, probably a little clinical, and will get the shot that you want and you can get a lovely image from it. But if you want something a bit more creative, there's a few options out there. I would always recommend using autofocus lenses for the majority of the wedding day because they're so fast moving and there's so many parts like the bride's first look and the ceremony that you can't really redo. You need a lens that you can trust and trust that you'll be able to get the shot. However, I know there are some guys who much prefer manual focusing and exclusively use things like Cine lenses. I know I had to get really good at manual focusing on the old S5 because the autofocus system just wasn't reliable. But generally speaking, if you've got good autofocus on your camera, I would stick to that unless you're really experienced with manual focus. That being said, if you do want to shoot everything manual focus or shoot a lot of it, there are plenty of affordable Cine lenses out there, such as the Cine Nightwalker and the Cine Primes and plenty of others, so there's loads to choose from at the moment. But when it comes to more interesting and unusual lenses, then you're probably going to be looking at something like these vintage lenses. This is, of course, the Helios 442. It's one of the most well-known vintage lenses out there. It's an f2 Soviet lens. You can get them for 40 or 50 pounds in the UK, and it produces a really nice, swirly, dreamy cinematic image for very little money. Now, I've not personally used this on a wedding. I've used this more for documentary and sort of artistic work, but I am thinking about using it for weddings going forward, at least certain ones. This has actually got an anamorphic mod in the back, so it basically shapes the bokeh to be more oval. I've even got a streak filter on it. I might take that out, but again, adds a bit more interesting look. Now, I wouldn't use lenses like this all day unless you're really confident, but the time to try them out is normally during the couple shoot. That's where you got a bit more time, things are a bit slower, and you can get a bit more creative. So again, lenses like the Helios 442 are fantastic. There's also plenty of other ones out there like the Jupiter 9 85mm f2. I've got an old Chinon 50mm f1.9. A lot of these vintage lenses are going to be like from the 60s, 70s and 80s, super affordable, usually with quite good sort of focus rings. This one I've actually modded so it's got a focus wheel on it. But again, a lot of these old photography lenses are really well built, really small, but they will cover full frame, and they're generally worth trying out, and you won't spend too much trying to do so. Now, the other type of lens that we haven't talked about yet, but I have mentioned on this channel before, is anamorphics. And this is going to be one that a lot of people are going to be interested in for weddings. Again, like with the vintage lenses and the manual lenses, I personally wouldn't shoot the whole day on anamorphic unless you're really confident and you know your stuff, but they're a really nice addition for doing some of the couple portraits and can really elevate those moments in the film. Now, something to remember if you are shooting with anamorphics is you're going to get different aspect ratios. So you're going to have to crop either the standard spherical footage, or you're gonna have to crop the anamorphic footage on the sides to make it all fit, unless you like that shifting aspect ratio look. I personally tend to crop to 2.4:1, so this works quite well when I'm using anamorphic lenses. In terms of actual lenses, there are plenty to choose from, and they're getting more affordable each day. Siri make the kind of OG 1.33 times squeeze. They are Super 35 lenses and they are really, really affordable. Equally, the slightly more expensive Laowa Nanomorphs, I think are 1.5 times squeeze. Again, Super 35 coverage. I think the flares are a bit more interesting. And in terms of full frame, Siri have the Venus and the Saturn sets, but I personally like this Blazar Remus 50mm with a 1.5 times squeeze. This has barrel distortion and loads of character. It's got silver flares, so they take on the color of the light source, and overall I've been really impressed with this lens. Now you've probably seen this on the channel in previous videos, and I have got a review planned for this, so I won't cover too much in this one, but this 50mm is a really good middle ground. I haven't used it on a ton of weddings, but I used it on a few over the summer, and I was really impressed with the results I got because I usually crop to a 2.4:1 aspect ratio. Shooting with this in 3x2 open gate yields around about a 2.25:1 aspect ratio, so I'm not having to crop this much at all, which is great. So I get the full character of the lens. But again, I wouldn't use this for much more than couple shots. It's quite a specialized lens. It's sharp in the middle, but there's a lot of fall off. I could maybe get away with using it for some candid shots, but I don't think it's quite tight enough for that. But yeah, for couple shots, this is great. I've got this mica rear V&D in it as well, but again, I'll cover more of that in a future review. You could also consider anamorphic adapters, such as the ones from Laowa or Sure. I picked up the Blazar Nero 1.5x, which gives very similar characteristics to the Remus. Paired with the Helios 442, you get some really interesting results. But again, I'll cover that more in a future video. I've got a whole review planned for this, but this is another something to consider for specialty shots. When it comes to primes versus zooms for weddings, there are benefits and drawbacks to both. I think if you tend to do more of an editorial style for your wedding videos, then prime lenses are the way to go. Being able to shoot at f1.8, 1.4 or even 1.2 and get real subject separation, really shallow depth of field and really artsy shots is really what you're going to be looking for those types of films. Also, being limited to a few different focal lengths will force you to be more creative with shots, which again can actually really elevate those editorial style films. I will say as well that actually some of my favorite videographers shoot almost entirely with a 50mm prime lens. However, I think if your wedding videos tend more towards the documentary style, then a zoom makes a lot more sense. I know for my films, I am more in the way of documentary with a bit of cinematic flair, so I generally find the zoom lenses suit me better. Something like a 24-70, like I've mentioned, or even Samyang's 35-150 are a really good option for a do-it-all lens that you can just capture everything on the fly and trust that you'll get the shot. I think in reality though, a hybrid approach with some zoom lenses and some prime lenses makes the most sense for most people. As you grow in your business and style, you'll tend to gravitate towards certain kind of lenses, but it's good to understand what the benefits of each type of lens are. From experience, the best piece of advice that I can give is to practice and experiment with the kit that you have. If you want something new, then try and borrow or rent it where possible. If you can't borrow or rent something, then at least doing plenty of research will really help. And then when you're sure, that's the best time to buy. One thing to remember is to try not to get caught up with gear acquisition syndrome. So you're constantly buying the new, latest and greatest lenses and not using the ones that you've already got. Trust me, it's a slippery slope. Anyway, I hope that was interesting and useful, whether you're just starting out or have been going for a couple of years. Hopefully there's some insight there and that will help you make your decision on lenses that you have or lenses that you might buy in the future. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, obviously like, subscribe, all that sort of stuff. Plenty more videos coming, hopefully every month or sooner if I can. I've got some reviews coming up, so be on the lookout for them. But in the meantime, have a good one. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.